And so we've got a really great panel coming up for you. I am super, super excited about the next folks that are going to join us on stage here. This discussion will be focused on not only the importance of secure autonomy, but some of the risks involved in those autonomous systems and the context that you need to know to ensure that autonomous drones are not hackable. Autonomous systems, we don't want to have these autonomous systems getting hacked. So we've got some really awesome folks coming up here with incredible experience in the field. And so we have, and I'll bring them up now, Michael Balazs, who is the Chief Futurist of Autonomy at the MITRE Corporation. Welcome, Dr. Balazs. We also have...
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Colin Guinn, who, if you don't know, is amazing, and he has just been like building all kinds of cool stuff in the Austin community around Texas. Colin, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
And last but certainly not least, Kevin Finisterre, who is the penetration tester at Digital Munition. Kevin is amazing. We've had some great conversations in preparation for this panel. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to leave you guys to it. Colin, I'm going to let you take the show. Why don't you kick things off?
Let's do it. You just go ahead and take a little rest, get yourself some relaxation, go get a snack.
I'm drinking my cold brew coffee.
Fantastic. Well, all right. Really excited about this talk. And yeah, Michael and Kevin, thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to kind of kick us off and lead us in a direction. And I think primarily we're going to be having Michael and Kevin, the security experts, talk about most of this. And so I think I'll start just by saying, high level intention for this discussion would be for all of us to understand a little bit better the risks that are associated with autonomy and how we can mitigate those risks through secure autonomy and practices in secure autonomy. And obviously, I think at the high level, everybody knows that autonomy is coming, and autonomy is going to bring a tremendous amount of value. And anytime we can create value for our species with less calories and less watts, then that's a really good thing. And I personally believe that autonomy is going to be one of those critical asymmetric value providers that may allow our species to hang around for a little bit longer. So super important. And I think we're all charging in that direction, but it's also just critical to understand the risks that are associated with that. And so I think the order that we're going to look at secure autonomy is kind of from the inception of an autonomous device all the way through getting it in the market and operating it. And so we're going to talk through supply chain security, how the device, where it's being made, what's happening, what the risks are there, getting it over to the, where it's going to be operating in, the physical security of the device. So what's being stored on it, can people access the device itself, the vehicle, whatever it is, the application software security. So the applications that are running on that device, are they secure? Do they have backdoors, things like that? And then the data link, generally these devices are either communicating with the cloud or an edge cloud server or a base station of some sort. And that data link is transmitting lots of telemetry. So these are kind of like the four areas that we think are the most important, or the kind of like the highest level areas that must be considered. And so we're going to have Michael and Kevin, we're going to start talking through just some of the considerations for each of these and what could happen and how we mitigate those things from happening, and what, smart folks like you guys are doing to protect us all. So let's start by talking about supply chain security. I think in that discussion, we will probably talk about the fact that there's a lot of concern, I know in the drone industry specifically, around using Chinese-made drones to do critical infrastructure inspection or government work or military applications and things like that. So let's just jump right in and start talking about supply chain. And Michael, if you want to start, or Kevin, hit it.
Yeah, I always like to start and introduce myself a little bit more.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
Give people a reason to understand why they care that I'm talking.
Yeah, that's a good call. Thank you, Kevin, for saving me on that one. Let's have both of you do that.
So I'm a former Red Team member for Department 13, and I worked on the Mesmer CUAS platform. And I basically helped design and implement protocol level exploitation against UAS command and control and telemetry links. And I've written code that's been used in the Black Dart and MITRE challenges, for example. Currently, I'm working on an autonomous vehicle security team for Cruise Automation. We're a GM subsidiary, and I help model threats and mitigate vulnerabilities against for our autonomous fleet, basically.
Excellent. And I guess I'll jump in. I'm Michael Balazs. I'm with the MITRE Corporation. You know, I'm a physicist by training, but I moved into autonomous systems about 10 years ago when I started at MITRE, and I've been doing that ever since. Most of my, about half of my autonomous work has been typically for groups like intelligence community and SOF. And so when you talk about security, those are very important for those groups. And so we did a lot where we were very concerned about attribution back to the United States. We were very concerned about where we were buying the parts for those systems. Over the years, we've done many, many different things. Probably the things that we are most known for potentially in the public is a system called the Razor, which was the first 3D, well, actually there was a precursor to that, but the one that really became public. First 3D printed drones out there. We were basically the second group to create a fully 3D printed drone that could fly. The other big thing that we did is a system called the Nibbler. So if you search for Nibbler and US Marine Corps, it is all over social media. They freaking love the thing. So we helped develop that, which was also a 3D printed drone. But that was originally developed for the Defense Intelligence Agency to be a remotely implaceable ground sensor. And there's actually a copy of that at the DIA museum now. I can say this stuff public now because it's so long ago. And then, you know, Kevin and I have actually met in person, despite COVID, but back at the MITRE Challenge we ran a number of years ago where we played the bad guys against a number of counter UAS systems to just see exactly where the vulnerabilities were to help inform the government on where they should put their investments. And then since then, we've moved into very much not just the physical systems and the data links, which is where we started, but very much into the world of autonomy. And we do a lot in that area for programs like the Locust program, if you're familiar with that, Navy low-cost unattended swarming technology. So that's kind of my background, about a decade's worth of experience now in this area.
So basically what you guys are saying is we didn't really find qualified people, so we just had to turn to you guys to talk about security.
I mean, you're slumming it is what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And Kevin, I've always enjoyed rapping with you about all this stuff. You're always making me look and go, oh man, that's scary. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. So yeah, super excited both of you guys are here.
Yeah, I've definitely been accused of keeping multiple folks up at night.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's a thing.
I think we're both probably good at that. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about where it all starts with supply chain. And, you know, if we're going to make and I think throughout this, let's just talk about like autonomous drones and autonomous cars as kind of just a background canvas to paint this picture on. And as kind of a rolling metaphor. So you're making an autonomous car, you're making an autonomous drone. How do we make sure that we're keeping it secure as the thing is being built?
So, you know, this is a big concern now across the entire. So my background is very much going to be from the defense space. I know Kevin's out in the commercial sector, so I think between the two of us, we'll add a nice balance. But this is very much something that the defense industrial base is very, very worried about. You know, more and more of what's being done has moved overseas. Now, while, you know, the physical machines, as they get bigger and more complicated, and the car may be, for example, built in the United States or things like that, the problem is most of these components are still foreign made. And there are plenty of issues with understanding exactly what's going on in those chips that are being constructed. You know, everything from, you know, what is happening with a secure data link that you're running and the data is going back to a server in the cloud that is from the original manufacturer of the device, and not knowing what data is sent back. You know, you're told X, Y, and Z, but what is the reality? Is that data link two-way? Is there something in there that might be reversible? Could that drone be grounded instantly without your consent? You know, those types of things. Same thing with the vehicles, you know. We're talking a lot about the way autonomous vehicles are probably going to eventually reach level 5 autonomy is going to have to be vehicle-to-vehicle communication. And those are going to be driven a lot by onboard chips, that likely are by design have open-ended communication channels. And Kevin can probably speak to that quite a bit more than I can. But, all those things that happen there. So it comes back to this concern of a secure foundry. How do we build secure foundries, and how do we do that in the US, and how do we do it at scale to be competitive? It's one thing for the Department of Defense to build up their own secure foundries, but that doesn't serve the larger community and the bigger problem. So how do we build and address those things from the very beginning are one of the big questions. And so I've been talking for a while. I'm going to let Kevin talk, and we can, of course, iterate on this topic. So
yeah, my role is traditionally that of an attacker. So I'm often trying to subvert these bits of the supply chain and sneak things in to compromise your device at the end of the day. I'd be simulating the role of, insert nation state here.
Can you please just tell us a fun story? Just one cool story that's public, or you can like change characters' names, but some of your stories are just incredible.
So yeah, a lot of the, like I mentioned before, I spent 3 years at Department 13 designing counter UAS platforms, and a real fun supply chain story, for example, is in our quest to compromise DJI's Light Bridge. I invested a lot of research time into trying to understand how that platform and its chipset worked. Eventually, I found out that there was a vendor named Artisan that actually created that underlying technology for them. And because I was fluent enough in the drone community and actually was trying to create my own product, I knew enough about navigating that portion of the supply chain to try to speak to that vendor and make them think that I was actually going to buy large volumes of their telemetry chipset. So after about 3 months worth of commenting back and forth with them and a large payment via wire transfer, I ultimately wound up with the same SDK that DJI used to create Lightbridge. And we were able to use that to subsequently create a mitigation to actually break the Lightbridge command link and allow us to insert into it. So that's kind of the back end of supply chain security. In that case, there was a vendor that probably should have kept a little bit more tight control on their intellectual property that they had leased to another party. But there are all kinds of other similar stories, in that vein. I've also seen some hardware, for example, that's been intended to be extremely secure. The boot process is signed. Firmware has to be encrypted and signed in order to run on the device. But the circuit level, there was a spot where you could solder a flash chip. And because of the design of the microcontroller, it would boot off of the flash chip before it booted off of the other boot mechanism that the vendor had intended to use. And that allowed me to be in a position to basically compromise the security of that platform and further go on and compromise the firmware itself. So those are the two best examples I can come up with of needing to understand bits of your supply chain and how they may ultimately go on to impact either your device's security or you as an individual consumer using a device that you believe is secure.
And so building on that, one of the major challenges is the fact that these systems are so complicated anymore. You don't have that vertical integration of a system that you did. You don't have complete control from top to bottom when you want to build a system, like even DJI with the example that Kevin just gave. DJI is a huge company, billion-dollar, industry, all of that, and they still don't control the end-to-end of their own supply chain, and that allowed the vulnerability to come in, And on top of that, what we do a lot with our support to the government is we help them build their own systems using open source technology as much as possible. And so that's one way. It doesn't fully address the problem, but it's one way that helps. Colin, you come from 3DR, you guys open source your autopilot software, all of that. That is something that definitely helps in a lot of ways, especially when you have the resources of the government to be able to comb that source code and ensure that it is actually secure. But not everyone can do that, and not everyone has those resources. So And
Yeah, that
lack
makes
of
it.
vertical integration, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah, it makes it very interesting because both consumers and manufacturers ultimately have to deal with a black box at some point in time, unless they have staff on hand with that very specialized skill set to be able to examine whichever aspect it is deeper. You might be handed a radio chip from a vendor, and the only thing you understand about it is the API on how you can communicate with it to make it send your data. But under the hood, how it actually works, you have no visibility there. So, yeah, supply chain is definitely something really important to understand as you're creating products and as you consume them.
And so thank you for that. And so I guess to mitigate against vulnerabilities in supply chain, the strategy is to have security experts and consultants that can come in and inspect your whole supply chain and basically try to figure out, is it secure? And, because it sounds like unless you're going to be completely vertically integrated and build everything yourself, you're leaving yourself somewhat open to, having to rely on other people's black boxes. So the mitigation strategy there is, make sure that that's part of your development team is securing the supply chain.
Yeah, and I would say, and even with this vertical integration, if you can get hands on someone's system, you're going to be able to compromise it. Like the moment you can physically touch the system, it at some point it will be compromised. Like, it's just overcomable. Like, so well, I was going to add something to that, but I would just say that's important to note. And then there's this whole like Apple. Apple has such control over their supply chain, but most people don't. Most mom and pops, most people that are building drones don't have that control. So it's risk management. It's understanding like, okay, I'm flying this drone, I'm using this thing to do it, right? Maybe I'm inspecting cell towers or something like that. What is really my concern and my risk? That's a big balance there. This topic is on security and securing drones. But you have to really think about, and we do this a lot, what is the operational risk? I think most people on this call probably know right now there's a ban on foreign-made components in drones for use by the DoD, okay? It's a directive across the board at the moment. And you can get waivers. The waiver process is sometimes easy, sometimes not, but there is a waiver process. But the thing is that goes into understanding getting that waiver is that risk management, understanding, all right, I'm going to fly this drone for 20 minutes to do an over-the-hill, surveillance. What are really my long-term risks with that? I'm flying in a place where my drone doesn't have the link length to reach something that I'm worried about. It's only talking back to my tablet, and my tablet is not going on the internet. So as we worry and think about all these security things, there's that risk management aspect that you have to come to. You're never going to get rid of all the concerns. So where is the balance between those two things?
And another thing with security in general is to understand that it's a continual process. And anytime you take a look at it, you need to understand that that's just a snapshot in time. So, I can make a statement about something I've seen in a particular product yesterday. That doesn't necessarily mean that it holds true tomorrow.
Yep.
You need to continue processing the things that are important to your security posture and validate them against the current snapshot in time for whatever it is that you're looking at.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Well, let's keep rolling. So that supply chain, now the device is made. And there's the physical security part of it, and then there's the application software security part of it. Let's talk a little bit about those two things, and then we'll go to data link. We've got about 10 minutes, I think, until we're going to start Q&A. So let's talk about kind of, now that the thing is made, there's the physical security part of it and the software application security part of it. So let's just kind of have a little bit of a dialogue around those two things.
I'm going to let Kevin lead off. I led off on the last one, so go for it.
So quickly and easily, I think we can point out two things. These devices are going to be collecting data from sensor platforms and often log files, for example. So there's things that they're going to hold that are important to you as a consumer. Secondarily, as a manufacturer, your intellectual property is going to be on these devices. So physical security becomes very important because you're ultimately protecting both your intellectual property and the data of your end user. So there's obviously gradients of how much security you can bake in. None is probably not the best choice. I'm actually looking at a police body cam platform right now just to keep my skills on par. And as soon as I took this device apart, I found an old SD card inside of it, and there was no data encryption at all. So I was able to see the configuration for the agency that this device used to belong to. So that's a prime example of not keeping assets that are on a device secure. And then from a manufacturing standpoint, if somebody is able to compromise your device and pull the firmware off of it, for example, you may wind up in a situation where somebody is literally able to steal or replicate your intellectual property.
Yep. And so that's the physical aspect. Michael, do you have anything on the physical device, the physical vehicle, the drone, the body cam, et cetera?
Yeah, so if we talk a little bit about maybe like the autonomy side of it on the application side, when it comes to the autonomy, there's a lot of trust and security around the autonomy. There are things that you can do to the autonomy that, because really that's where this is going, right? Autonomy is the future. That's what's driving the market, and everything like that. But when you're working with the autonomy, you have to be able to trust it, and you have to be able to make sure it's secure, and there's a number of things that we worry about when it comes to that approach. And so Dr. Michael Kramer, who's a JIDO guy, a couple years ago put out what he calls the 5 Ds of securing autonomy, right? And it's interesting because some of them have to do with the physical system itself, and others don't. If you've got a system that you're trying to protect and secure, or really if you're trying to counter an autonomy system, which is a little bit where my expertise is, you've got software that's running on it. But you can degrade that autonomy in different ways. You can make the input to the autonomy no longer reliable. So if you flip that around, you have to think about, how does a system trust its input? If I blind the EO sensor with a dazzler or a smoke canister or things like that, or jam the comms between the swarm, the system needs to be smart enough to detect that that's happening, right? It needs to be smart enough that if I try to deceive it, one of the big things that is coming along now, we're starting to see it in some public systems, but definitely in DoD systems, is this idea of visual navigation, right? I'm working with unreliable GPS or intentionally denied GPS, and I have the ability to follow landmarks on the ground, right? This idea of maybe I follow the Washington Monument, that kind of stuff, right? Down to the Capitol. What if I can put up fake things? What if I can trick it? Adversarial AI approaches, what if I can trick its sensors into thinking it's seeing something else and send it somewhere else? There's a lot that has to be done with securing the autonomy on board so that it's trustworthy, that you actually know it's going to perform. It's not going to get tricked by other things. I see that Kevin brought something up, so I'll throw it back to Kevin.
Yeah, looks like we've only got 7 minutes left, so let's dive through the data link security and then the application link security real quick. The only thing I wanted to mention is everybody needs to be aware of your data links, your C2, and your telemetry. That is, in my opinion, the Achilles heel of secure and secure autonomy. Your drones all need controlled by something. And if those links are compromised, it means that somebody else can control them, or subsequently that somebody else can view your sensor data that's going over those links. There's a large swath of the counter UAS industry that relies literally on the influence of drone control links. So just something to be aware of. A couple of quick examples that were from my personal life. DJI Spark and Mavic Air used a very special and obscure quarter band Wi-Fi card to control their drones. It just so happened that it uses WEP, which is a 20-year-old known vulnerable encryption routine. So the combination of the obscure quarter band and the WEP basically made it, quote, secure. Most people couldn't see it. Once we took the opportunity to find it, we were able to crack those links in 13 seconds, which allows us to basically observe any data that goes over that link or inject and control the drone. A second one that's a good example is the 3D robotics radio vulnerabilities that I disclosed back in 2015. That would allow someone to man in the middle any 3D robotics radio. There's a number of products that made use of that, from consumer up to military, and they're all susceptible to the same vulnerability. And then the last one I touched on briefly earlier was DJI's Lightbridge. That is another link that many of you used historically that was compromised. DJI actually argued with me and told me that I was lying and that it was not possible. We actually demonstrated it at Black Dart and a couple other events to prove that it actually was real. But again, you can't necessarily rely on your vendor's definition of secure.
But again, you were still lying and it was still not possible.
Absolutely. Fake news for sure.
Fake news.
Yeah, be aware of what your data links mean to the security of your application, whether it's in the air, on the ground, or in the sea.
Yep, absolutely. One other one that I'll give that keeps coming up for us in some of the clients that we're working with right now is, if you're doing critical infrastructure inspection, you're creating, data models of roadways or dams or bridges or power lines, energy grid infrastructure. Oftentimes, people are very concerned about this data being sensitive and secure. And so there's great lengths taken from the time that the micro SD card gets put into a hard drive and it's all AES 256 encrypted. But we forget this time between pulling the micro SD card out and putting it into a computer, and it's just completely vulnerable at that point. And that's where I think there has to be this holistic approach of secure autonomy and secure data, because if you can just pull a micro SD card out and copy the footage off of it before it goes on to, up into the cloud via some AES 256 encrypted, data structure, then it's kind of a moot point. So,
Colin, that goes back to what we said before, is that fundamentally, if you have access to the device, it's not secure. It just doesn't matter. At that point, it's just not secure anymore, So Kevin, I'd be curious what your thoughts on, you mentioned this 13-second cracking, right? But none of those protocols that you've described so far actually are encrypted. They may be obfuscated type protocols, but they're not actually encrypted, right? So what happens when we actually move to a point of it's encrypted before the data link level, So it's encrypted, hardware chip encrypted the data before it even gets passed to the radio. Where does that put us?
Basically, we wind up raising the bar. And actually, that 3DR radio is a good example. There is an AES version, and somebody makes an industrial variant of it. Mm-hmm. The joke about that was the early variant of the code had static keys in it. So anybody that was too ignorant to go in and change the keys was just vulnerable to a different.
It's like the DB tracking, right? Yeah. So.
Exactly. And, there's other instances where maybe plain text from the telemetry stream that is already known could be used to reverse it, but it basically raises the bar. I know we've got 2 minutes left now. We have one last topic to touch on, and that was the application software security.
Hit that, Kevin.
Say it again.
Just hit it. Let's go. Roll.
I did have an image up that I want to discuss in tandem with this, but there's several points that come along with application security. Data privacy is the biggest one, and that includes the data privacy of your sensor data, which we've kind of discussed ad nauseum at this point, as well as your flight logs, where you've been and what you've been doing with your drone. And there's also your personal information. A lot of these applications that enable you to have ground control and other functionality with your drone are actually connected in other ways that may compromise you. So you also need to consider your phone itself. Your phone may be compromised by the apps that you install, which may put you in a completely different position. So the imagery that's up now relates to personal information. And I'm going to get a little targeted here and discuss mass data collection. DJI has been, at least since 2016, collecting all of our data for whatever reason. And I think it's something we all need to be aware of and understand. It's very similar to what Facebook does. We all voluntarily use their platform and give them information. We're only just recently understanding that we're actually a product of theirs. So this information that they collect, they're able to understand our sentiment, which is what we think about things, what we may want to buy, what we may want to do. So not all of you may know, but I participated in a bounty program with DJI back in 2017, and I compromised their entire infrastructure. They chose not to pay the bounty, and we were at odds over it. In the process, I've over time released some of the things that concerned me that I saw on their server. What you're looking at now is something that came off of their server that outlines their public opinion analysis platform, which has a component that they call personalized information cross-matching, which they use to build a user portrait for you as part of their data platform. So I don't know if you can see this picture that looks like a human, but it's composed of a bunch of different images that represent things that you may think about, and that is your fingerprint as a user. They utilize every available input of data that they have to collect on you, whether it's from wireless, Bluetooth, point of sale, forums, anything that they can comb that they may be able to get information on. And they use it to subsequently create a user portrait of you, which they use to generate what they call a product portrait. So they're very in tune with what people think about their product. They also have the ability to search all of the log files of their users as part of this platform. And they're able to generate a heat map of where their product is used based on this data input from the log files. So again, it's just something I wanted you guys to see and be aware of. This is a consequence or a ramification of you choosing to use a particular product. You've in essence made yourself a product that they're able to sell to somebody else. One thing I noticed in the translation of these slides was that they specifically mentioned that they cooperate with the Ministry of Information Security in China to comply with their standards. So again, imply or infer from that what you will. The main takeaway point is that we all need to be in tune with what the applications that we're using to enable our secure autonomy are doing with the data that is collected in the process of our drone use. And that's all I have.
Yeah, well, Kevin, thank you for that. So the concern is potentially quite founded. You know, I hear a lot of people talking about the concern of, you know, Chinese drones collecting data, but having gone in and found it, pretty impressive. And, you know, it's, yeah, it's definitely a thing. So let's jump into questions here. I am going to start at the top. So from Bill, and this is to Kevin, does GM's autonomous team care about ORBs as well as cars?
Generally speaking, I'm not at liberty to discuss any of GM's stuff. There's a number of blogs and Medium posts that cover what we discuss publicly, but I'm not at liberty. I apologize.
Yep, no problem. Okay, good. From Dan, what is the most exciting and society-changing autonomous technology that will be coming out in the next 10 to 20 years? Likely we have no idea what it is and haven't even thought of it yet, but let's just pretend.
So, you know, I don't know. This is not game changing, but I'll tell you the thing that I'm most looking forward to is traveling to DC from Charlottesville and not having to actually drive. Just having, you know, being able to work the entire 2 hours each way would be amazing. So, I mean, that's the big thing. You know, we have such a long way to go, even on that. You know, so you say 10 to 20 years, it's hard to project out what those things are going to be. But I think that, you know, mostly, I think it's going to be system. I think the big thing that we're going to see in autonomy for the average user is convenience. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
You know, we'll get to, you know, Amazon will get to the point that I'll order something and it will be delivered within an hour. You know, the ability to not have to drive to wherever, you know, food is delivered to my house automatically. That's the type of stuff.
I think autonomy is going to bring a lot of convenience. I would say in terms of avoiding existential crisis for our species, I'd love to see large solar-powered autonomous ocean Roombas that use computer vision and data collected from the stratosphere to identify massive amounts of plastic in the ocean, and to just scoop all that plastic up, put it into a solar-powered autonomous container ship that takes it to shore, and then have Icon autonomously 3D print that plastic into houses for people that need houses, and just have the sun powering the whole machine, and they're just houses are spitting out of a machine that have been collected from plastic bottles in the ocean. So I mean, that's actually possible right now. Yeah. It's just there's no financial interest behind making that happen, but hopefully in the next few years there will be.
We tackle the non-financially incentive problems.
Let's talk.
From my physicist background, you know, I will say I'm whole hog on solar. I think solar has it has past that point where it is going to become our dominant power source, and we're already at that tipping point, in my opinion. So,
awesome.
That's an off topic, but yeah.
This is, I think, for Michael on developing domestic foundry capacity. Do you see anyone in the industry side pushing this? With Intel especially struggling with their fab technology, this shift to offshore third-party fabs is continuing. Is anyone willing to put up the dollars to drive the domestic development?
So,
it's a great question.
Yes, and it's a complicated question because there's a lot of moving parts to it. So first off, I will say, you know, the current administration is pushing very much for bringing manufacturing back to the United States, okay? I will also say that MITRE is very involved and is setting up a lot of its own stuff to help the government with incentivizing the moving back of manufacturing to the United States. The main challenge with that remains it's the capital cost, and that's capital in the sense of both building the initial infrastructure and the people, right? But one of the big things that we are seeing, if you look at kind of the Tesla model and the Gigafactory model that they're going at, you know, for better or worse, we can compete with the prices of China in terms of manufacturing when we automate the process, you know? So it means manufacturing coming back to the US, it doesn't mean jobs coming back to the US. And that's a very contentious problem. And that's one of the biggest issues with why manufacturing, you know, of these things like the secure foundries have not come back, because we can't compete with the cost to do it. But autonomy might be the way that happens. You know, I think that if you can drive down and the foundry costs are low enough that, you know, everything is automated and then everything is secure because it's built in a secure foundry, that will be the biggest game changer. And I think there is a lot of warnings and indicators that that's going to happen. You know, we'll see what happens if there's an administration shift here in a couple months. We'll see if that changes. But under the current administration, there's enough pressure that that's actually going to happen. And there's enough pressure from the DoD to make it happen from their perspective too. It's just a matter of getting the defense industrial base on board. And I think once they do, then we'll see the incentive of the commercial industry following behind. Awesome. So that's my thought process. So.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you. Okay, from Jack, open source can provide visibility for identifying security issues. It also makes the behavior of the device as well as the communications and control protocol visible to adversaries. It would greatly simplify for the complicated attacks Kevin mentions. So wouldn't a closed source alternative that's been well vetted by trusted programs provide a better solution? And so, yeah, what do you think about that, Kevin?
Yeah, so I don't know that I'd say better necessarily. Absolutely, it could provide a good alternative in some situations. An example of those two vulnerabilities that I mentioned earlier, even with the source code to both the hardware, radio, and the software that ran on the radio, it took me and two other people 3 years to tool that 3D robotics exploit to where I considered it productized. Whereas on the other hand, with the aid of the compromised supply chain and the removal of that obscurity that the closed aspect added, we actually compromised Lightbridge in a year. So there was really no discernible difference in the amount of effort that we put in, just because one was closed versus open. I would say that there's probably an additional hurdle that would come into play is that you'd only have a view into that black box in the vetted, trusted platform anytime it was audited or somebody provided an audit report. You'd in turn still, in my opinion, need to do your own due diligence, even in the presence of that trusted vetting.
Yep. I think that makes sense right now. Okay, so on these questions, I've got a couple of questions here from Bill. And the first one's Michael, have you looked at that one? Do you? I'm not exactly sure if I understand the DoD security guidelines that he's talking about with Nick Chalian. I don't know if you understand that. We can ask and answer that one. Otherwise, I like this one also from Bill. Basically, that there's a concept that VMware has started to push called Intrinsic Security, where the cloud creates zero trust clusters, and the apps inside don't need to go through the cost and delay to secure their code. Is this also a great notion for speeding up tech acquisition? So I don't know about that. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about that, or if Kevin, if you've heard anything about that or know what he's talking about. You guys are smarter than me on this by one order of magnitude.
So I don't know anything on the second, and I am not familiar with the security guidelines that Bill's referencing regarding Nick. I'll have to go check those out. But I just at a very quick and general level, there is a lot of GOTS work at the moment, government off the shelf. There's a lot of work to build GOTS autopilots, a GOTS software stack for autopilots, a GOTS, reliable telemetry. Now, those, of course, will not be perfect. They will have all of the issues that we've talked about today, but it's major steps towards creating that secure, at least for the DoD side. There is a lot of work that's being done along those lines. DIUX is a good example of a group that's very involved in that would interface well with the startup community here on the phone today, or on the conference call.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as far as the zero trust clusters and that commentary with regards to VMware, I always take that sort of stuff with a grain of salt. I think zero trust is kind of a buzzword around a concept. In my opinion, it means you shouldn't trust the things in your network. You should authenticate them first. It doesn't necessarily mitigate your vulnerability. It moves it elsewhere. VMware has in the past been compromised at the hypervisor level, which would, for example, compromise all of those containers simultaneously. So it just changes the threat model and changes
the shell game, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. God, you guys are so smart. I just nod my head and pretend like I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's right.
No, I consider myself, this is my favorite word, Colin, an ultra-crepidarian, one who speaks with more knowledge and authority than they actually possess.
Well, but you understand what that word means. I didn't even never heard that word. So you just proved my point. Yep. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I'm really honored to be here with people that are such masters in their field. So it's really awesome. I appreciate the time. Sean, you're back. I hope you had a good break. I hope you had some snacks. Maybe got a little nap or something.
Oh, are you kidding me? I was Googling constantly to learn about all the things that you guys discussed. And I'm a former English teacher, and I don't know what that word means that you just said. So,
okay, good.
It's my favorite word in the English dictionary. So, yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully.
Love.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here. We're going to move into the networking section of our programming next. So maybe in the networking session, people can ask each other about their favorite vocabulary words or secure autonomy. Totally up to you guys. So we're going to do networking here in just a second. You're going to go over to network with other attendees. There's my script. Thank you. Press the networking icon on the left-hand side of your screen. You'll be randomly paired with another attendee, and we'll have 5 minutes to chat with one another. If you'd like to continue your conversation after your session, click the connect button at the bottom of your screen, and you'll both receive an email from Hopin. How convenient. So with that, it is time to head over to networking. We will see you back here at 11 a.m. for our next session on Vulnerability at the edge. See you soon.